Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to present to you a gentleman who is not only a wonderful human being, a distinguished politician, a representative of his country and the European community, the United States, but also my very, very good friend. But I want to tell you a couple of things about him. You know, you can read the curriculum vitae, and they're always very impressive. When you really know the person, it makes so much difference. Andreas von Acht is a graduate of the University of Nijmegen, and after he graduated from Nijmegen in 1955, he went into the private practice of law. From there, he went into the Dutch civil service, and from the Dutch civil service became the Minister of Justice for the Netherlands in a coalition government that was led by a left-wing member of the Labour Party. Over a period of years, Mr. von Acht was instrumental in doing something I don't think any other Dutch politician ever did. You know, there's an old saying that if you have two Dutchmen, you have a political party. And if you have three Dutchmen, you have a schism. There were ever so many political parties, several of a religious nature. And one of the marvelous accomplishments of Mr. von Acht was to be able to unify all the Christian parties in the Christian Democrat appeal. And the party which he succeeded in leading and putting together that way has been the dominant force in Dutch politics ever since. From his position as Minister of Justice, he then became Deputy Prime Minister and later was Prime Minister when his party took control of the Parliament. He resigned his position after a number of years because he said he was a little tired with politics. He could have been re-elected forever, but chose instead to become the Queen's Commissioner to the province of Brabant. But that's kind of a sinecure, let's say, an easy sort of job, and not the sort of thing that our guest really found challenging. So off he went to, where do you suppose, to Tokyo. And there he spent 3 years in the representation of the common market to Tokyo. And from there, he came to the United States as the representative of the common market, the Commission of Communities, to the United States. Now, my experiences were quite unique with the Mr. von Acht, and I'll just tell you about two of them. There came a time when it was the policy of the United States to try to place drug enforcement agents in various countries where drugs were coming in large quantities to the United States, and one of these, we believed, was the Netherlands. The minister and I had, when he was Justice Minister, had long discussions about this matter and about what seemed to be a rather lax policy towards drugs in the Netherlands. And I suggested to him, and he readily agreed, to come to the United States, which he did, for a period of 1 week to experience what the drug war was all about. And our guest rode in a helicopter and then in a police car in Harlem, actually following a drug bust. He had various briefings by the Drug Enforcement Agency, by the head of our FBI and other government agencies here. And on his return, he meditated about what he'd seen, and not wishing to see the same circumstances come to the Netherlands, he proposed and saw that the drug laws were changed in the Netherlands, becoming considerably stricter and allowing the Drug Enforcement Agency to have representatives in that country. And then another extraordinary circumstance in which I saw him perform in admirable fashion and very difficult circumstances indeed was when the French ambassador, Jacques Senard, who had the building next to ours in The Hague, was seized by the Japanese Red Army and held hostage for a period of 4 days. This poor man was forced to lean out of the window with a pistol pointed at his head in this fashion, and meanwhile all kinds of demands were made on the Dutch government, including the request for release of political prisoners in France and other places in the world. It was a very tense time, with great risks involved. As Justice Minister, Mr. Van Acht handled himself in the most admirable fashion and reached a solution which everybody applauded. I could tell you a great deal more about this man, who was a great friend of the United States and my personal friend, but I know you want to hear him, so it's with a great deal of pleasure I present to you His Excellency, my good friend, great friend of the United States, Andreas Van Acht. Thank you.
Good evening. What a nice, what a wonderful introduction was that. I feel I should reciprocate. Due to time constraints, I'll be brief. Ambassador Kingdon Gould is great. Yeah, a wonderful introduction and a benevolent audience, as it sounds, as it looks. However, the only thing about me you know now yourself from your own experience is that I kept you waiting. And I feel I have to make up for the frustrations that have been building up in you, taking into consideration that Americans are wonderful people. It's a great people and a great country among the very, very, very few shortcomings they have. One is, you're not just the most patient ones, I thought. But that is a thesis I have to review, and I will review as of now. About the reshaping of Europe. That is my assignment for this evening, and for the discussion we will hopefully have after my introductory remarks. I think you are pretty well aware of what the European community is about. I won't go into details discussing that. It all started immediately after World War II, and the driving force behind the creation of that community in Western Europe was to reconcile forever the arch enemies France and Germany. Bear in mind that France and Germany, waging war against one another twice within half a century, had caused 2 world wars to erupt, in both of which the United States of America got engaged. That should never happen again. And that was the basic idea behind the creation in the 50s of that European community. It started as a community of 6, the so-called Benelux countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, plus, of course, France and Germany, and Italy. 6 countries, 6 founding fathers, or why not mothers? And that community grew into what now is a community of 12. In the 70s, the United Kingdom joined, and Britain, and Ireland and Denmark. In 1980, it was Greece that joined, and in the mid-80s, Spain and Portugal. The community is now, does exist now for, roughly speaking, 35 years, 30 to 35 years. It has gone through periods of crisis, in particular in the 70s and in the early 80s. But a revival came in the mid-80s, about 5-6 years ago. A revival for a variety of reasons. We Europeans came to realize, almost shockwise, due to rapidly growing unemployment, for example, in our part of the world, we realized that we were no match for the big giants in the world, the United States and Japan. And that we had to do something spectacular about reviving economic growth and about doing away with industrial and technological backwardness. What was helpful in that process of revival was that a new political philosophy took root, the philosophy of deregulation. And I think we owe it at least partly to Margaret Thatcher. That revival resulted in the mid-80s in the Single Market 1992 program, the project of a single market 1992. You know, I think, at least more or less, what the Single Market 1992 really is about. Briefly speaking, it is about the establishment of what we call our 4 freedoms. Freedom of circulation for goods, for services, for capital, and for persons. That is what we are aiming at. And that has to be achieved by tearing down 3 kinds of barriers within Europe. Physical barriers, so no border posts, no border checks and controls anymore. Fiscal barriers, approximation of tax systems, and technical barriers. Technical barriers is about mutual recognition of standards and test and certification procedures for products produced within as well as without the community. I think it's interesting to tell a bit more briefly on those technical barriers that are to be abolished. By now, each and every member state of the community, in principle, sets its own standards and has its own tests and certification procedures. So when you are, for example, let's say, an American producer of lawn mowers, is my pronunciation correct? That kind of things. Yeah, okay. lawn mowers. If you produce that kind of things and you want to export to Europe, you are likely to have to cope with a variety of standards that may be different, slightly different in France from the ones existing in Germany, and perhaps other ones in Britain, and slightly different again in Spain, and so on. And that means for you a very seriously fragmented market, not allowing for large-scale operations. Now, as of the beginning of 1993, under the Single Market Program, we will have a system by which you are fine when meeting one of the standards in one of the countries. And as soon as you meet the British or the French or the German or the Spanish or whatever standards of any community country, you are entitled to market your product all over the place in 12 countries of the community. And that, of course, creates great opportunities for large-scale operations, both for the Europeans themselves and, to the same extent, for people from abroad, in particular for Americans. Now, how far are we in bringing about that project of the large, vast single market, 1992? Pretty well on track. And let me give you one example of the progress made thus far, to give you a better feel of what we are doing. In the context of that single market 1992, I told you 4 freedoms are going to be created. One of the 4 being free circulation for services. Now, an interesting example here may be free circulation of banking services. What is the matter? After the 1st of January 1993, every bank that has obtained a license, that has been authorized to do its business in one of the 12 countries of Europe, will be automatically entitled to do all the business at once in all the 12 other European countries. Again, the same basic idea, a large market allowing for large-scale operations. And we will permit banks to do business all over Europe, not only in banking proper activities, but also in investment, securities, and in insurance. And that makes, in this respect, I should not overdo it, but in this respect, the European community, after a couple of years, will be more of a unity than is the United States of America. And that sounds perhaps a bit surprising, but it is really so. You have in this good country a variety of laws that are highly restrictive of deploying banking activities. Interstate banking is not allowed, or hardly allowed. You have to have a license for each and every state where you want to do your business. In universal banking is not allowed. A commercial bank may not go into the business of securities or the business of insurance. That makes that for bankers, the situation in Europe within a couple of years is much more interesting than it is in the United States. And of course, that created some problems when we were in the process of drafting our new liberal legislation for all of Europe. People said, listen, what we are going to do is we are going to create a situation in which Americans, as far as banking is concerned, are going to have much better opportunities in Europe than the Europeans find in the United States. So shouldn't we introduce the concept of reciprocity? And we didn't do that after a lot of discussion with our American counterparts, but we didn't do it. We accepted the situation that you will be able to do more business in Europe than we can do for the time being in the United States. Because we are not discriminated in this country. We feel treated rather badly, but as badly as you treat your own people. So there's no question of any discrimination. We just would like to extend to you a brotherly recommendation to adjust your banking laws to the new European model. Now, a bit more about project reaching beyond 1992. For quite a few people think that the European community is about the creation of the single market, and that's it. No, much more is in the making. There are two big projects that are worth mentioning now. One of these projects is the creation of an economic and monetary union. Negotiations on that project are already taking place now in the framework of an intergovernmental conference in which the 12 member states of the community participate. The economic and monetary union is designed, of course, to consolidate the single market and to deepen the process of integration. And it is to be brought about in 3 subsequent stages. We are now in stage 1. Stage 1 is regular and intensive and extensive discussions, consultations among the 12 in order to bring about more convergence of the 12 economies. And on that basis then a monetary union can be built. Stage 2 is in the beginning of 1994. Then we will set up a European Central Bank, modeled more or less after the example given by you, a Federal Reserve Bank system. So then we will introduce a single European monetary policy. And then thirdly, the last phase of the process will be the introduction of a single European currency. There are many problems about this project, of course. It is very a project that requires a lot of sacrifices on the part of the sovereign states, members of the European community. Sovereign powers considered by sovereign states over centuries as being essentially inherent to their being a sovereign state are going to be transferred to central European authorities. Of course, that creates some amount of resistance, reluctance, reticence at least. The other project is about a European political union. Now that is a big and ambitious word. European political union. And I think I should explain to you what it really means. By now, the European community does hardly have a political identity, and certainly not a political identity commensurate with its economic eminence. For example, the community still cannot speak with one voice in the United Nations. And the flaws of the present situation were clearly shown, yes, highlighted in the Gulf crisis. Now, in order to improve that situation, we are now having a second intergovernmental conference to make Europe more of a political union, not only economic but also a political union. And the most important subjects that are under discussion in the framework of that intergovernmental conference are the following ones. One is about a strengthening of the European Parliament. We have a European Parliament. It is directly elected, and it has its headquarters in Strasbourg, French, but it is not invested with many and impressive powers. So one of the subjects under discussion is how can we strengthen the European Parliament, how can we heighten the profile of that democratic institution. That is one. Let me add here one more thing. Why is this so important? It is so important for at least two reasons. It is a bi-dimensional issue. One reason is that the community is more and more practicing majority voting in the decision-making process. More and more majority voting. That means, of course, the more you introduce majority voting, the less the controlling power of national parliaments on their representatives really matters. Ministers can always say, I did what I could, but there was a majority, and so I couldn't prevent things from happening. Or I expected there to be a majority, and so I thought I could better be nice. Or that kind of thing. So it erodes the controlling power of national parliaments. And the second dimension is more and more and more powers and competences are being transferred to the European community institutions. So that needs to be compensated for adequately by democratic control on the European level. Another thing is, as I already indicated, an extension and strengthening of community action. There's more powers for the community as such. To give you a flavor of what this is about, I'm talking now about social matters, about environment protection, about research and development activities to strengthen the community's competitive capacity, and energy policy. Energy policy is very interesting, certainly now. The new idea that has been submitted just a couple of months ago, and it is now under discussion, is to create a European-wide energy charter. And the quintessence of the European Energy Charter is thought as follows, is conceived as follows. The Soviet Union should open up its energy resources, oil, gas, which does and it has so abundantly in return for massive investments from Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union has the resources but is unable to tap them. So we can help one another. We can dispatch important investments in technology and capital into the Soviet Union, and in return they should supply us forever with the oil and gas that can be found in their soil, in order to drastically reduce the dependence on oil from the Middle East. Then another important thing under the heading of European Political Union is, and again I indicated a little bit of it already, is to devise a common foreign and security policy. Now, by now there is consensus about how to bring this about, how to do it. The consensus is that general guidelines on common foreign policy should be agreed upon by unanimity, but qualified majority would be enough for the implementation of agreed policies. And all this then has to result, as it is conceived, has to result in a common security policy which you should think of as a solidified European pillar within the framework of NATO. Now, how long am I talking at the moment? Oh, you say, yeah, that's nice, fine, you say, but I asked for how long. But the answer is much nicer than the question. Is now 30 minutes already? Then thank you very much, but I'll cut it short. But I think I should make some observations at least about our external relations. Until now we have focused on Europe and more of Europe. And I think it's high time now to make clear that Europe finds itself part of the world and is aware of its responsibilities vis-à-vis the world around it. Now we have a variety of external relations that are interesting to talk about. Time does not permit to do so, perhaps partly during Q&A. One relationship that is very important is the 12 community countries with the so-called EFTA countries. That is Scandinavia, Switzerland and Austria. Another relationship, equally important, is brand new with the former satellites of the Soviet Union, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, to a lesser extent, Romania and Bulgaria. A third relationship is with the Soviet Union itself. A fourth is with the Lomé countries. Lomé stands for a group of about 70 former colonies in Africa, Asia and the Caribbean, former colonies of mainly Britain and France that have a special relationship with the European community and a privileged access to the market. But I think the most important subject under the heading of external relations is, for you, the relations with the United States. And also for me, of course, but it is my job to foster those relations, and I like to. Now, I think the most important message in this context should be the following. Whatever the problems may be, the problems may be the United States economy and trade figures are facing. You are in the plus with Europe. Isn't that great news? You have a firm, not an impressive, but a solid trade surplus with Europe. That's fine. There's no reason for us to introduce a 301 or so. On our part, we can live with it. It's fine. It may be interesting to mention also, in this context, there is so much discussion nowadays about the Uruguay round and the GATT and agriculture. I cannot refrain from mentioning the fact that even in the area of agriculture, the United States has a solid surplus with Europe, exports much more to Europe than it does import from Europe. That goes for the global figure as well as for the specific figure regarding agriculture. The EC is by far your largest export market. We take 1/4 of your exports. And the United States is by far the most important investor in the European market. And the Europeans are by far the most important investor from abroad on the American market. Not the Japanese, no, the Europeans. I think the prospects for our relationship, both economic and political, are really good, are really promising. Very interesting indeed, and I think there's each and every reason to be positive. This may be enough to kick off the ball of our discussion, Mr. President. Yeah, let's save at least 20 minutes for a lively discussion. Every meeting with an American audience guarantees a lively discussion.
We'll have questions now until perhaps 15 or 20 minutes after, if that's congenial with,
yes,
you.
I'm fine.
Now, we normally, as you know, end at 10 minutes after 7. Those of you who have plans are allowed to leave at that time, but we will continue until 10 after 7. Yes, sir, at the microphone.
I would like to ask this. With a number of things that are being consolidated, including banking, what changes are going to be necessary in the laws of the countries that make up the European community? It would seem, for example, that in controlling things such as banking, that there would have to be a consolidation of laws, some of which may at present be in great disharmony.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, two categories of changes in national legislations. One is, the most important one is, the community makes so-called directives to bring about that single market 1992, so-called directives. Setting what the new regime should basically be about, so setting the outlines of the new regime and giving the member states the opportunity to implement those directives in their own national legislation. That is one. Then, as a consequence of these European Community directives implemented by member states in their national legislations, you will get a fair degree of harmonization already, yeah? That is clear. Not a full harmonization. The thinking is that in as much as differences between national legislations will keep existing, the competition will do the rest. Yeah? The thinking is that in as much as differences of national legislation will be there after 1992, the market mechanisms will do the job. So there will be a tendency to adjust the legislations that are more cumbersome for private investment, to adjust them to other legislations that are more forthcoming from the viewpoint of competition. But on the whole, as of what I said remains correct, as of 1993, when you are a banker, you have a banking license in Britain, you can do every conceivable banking business in the 12 countries, as of 1993.
Yes, ma'am, at the microphone.
As you see yourself realizing the goals of the EEC, unifying step by step as you laid out, first of all, do you see what policy that you will be adopting towards the money, number one? And secondly, do you see yourself eventually adopting one uniform language to facilitate a united Europe?
The question is, would you comment upon the monetary policies that will be necessary for unification, and do you envision a common language?
As to the latter question, no. Certainly no. And that of course is, that this indicates a problem, what you could call a problem, and in a way it is. We have in the community of 12 now 9 official languages. The Belgians speak Dutch or French, so that just makes one language less in the counting. And what is there more? No, yeah, okay. Yeah, the Irish speak English. That also helps. And so, there are 9 official languages. That means that all official meetings at community level are conducted in 9 languages. All official documents are written and in 9 languages, which makes for an enormous amount of bureaucratic paperwork, and a very expensive thing because we employ hundreds, at least, perhaps even thousands of interpreters to keep that going. In fact, the situation is a bit less dramatic in that the community has 2 working languages. So most of the meetings are not just official meetings, but are just working meetings, and there the languages are English or French, and that's it. There's no plan to introduce one language. Of course, if we did, it would be English. But that you may sell to the French. And some others. No, there's no prospect and in a way we are happy, and I think many of you having visited Europe will understand this. In a way we are happy with preserving as much as possible the cultural diversity of Europe. It's a good thing. The advantages of it outweigh the disadvantages. As regards your first question, monetary policy, if I took it correctly, monetary policy will be about guaranteeing price stability in the entire community. In the framework of the European Economic and Monetary Union, monetary policy, we will introduce, most likely, binding rules on what budget deficits will be permissible, will be allowed. We will introduce rules saying that no member state that has exceeded those rules will ever be bailed out by others. Thus we will introduce into the daily economic and monetary life of the community a lot of discipline that doesn't exist by now. In fact, what you're going to see is the introduction of a real European-wide monetary policy a policy that you can liken to the one conducted here by the Federal Reserve in Washington.
Yes, sir.
In your introductory remarks, you commented briefly upon the community's relationship with the former Soviet bloc countries. I was wondering if you could comment on the long-run prospects for incorporating some or all of the newly emerging democracies in Eastern Europe in the European community, and also on what policies the EEC is currently or will implement to both encourage the economic development and the political stabilization of the region.
Yeah. In fact, two questions, but of course they have their link. What is the community doing now for these countries? So Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and others. Well, we are now negotiating with these three countries in particular, others may follow, with the Poles, with the Hungarians, and with the Czechoslovakians, the Czechs and the Slovaks. We are conducting negotiations with them that are meant to result in the conclusion of association agreements. Association agreements are agreements that will open the door for a free trade zone encompassing also these countries on the longer term. What is longer term? That's 5 to 10 years. But that a free trade zone that will be created gradually, in stages. The situation is to some degree comparable with the one Spain and Portugal found themselves in. Spain and Portugal prepared themselves over 10 years for full membership of the community. That is for the transition period. In the meanwhile, we will not only give them much more market access to the purchasing power, strong purchasing power markets of Western Europe, but we will also extend to them financial aid, technical assistance, forms of cultural cooperation will be developed to feel them like being members of the family already. And most importantly, political dialogue. Now, and then after a while, a possible full membership. I must add, however, that the association agreements in the making now do not include an entry ticket to the common market. I think that is my personal view. They will, over time, become members of the common market, of the European community, but they have not given the right also to become full members after a couple of years. That is a matter of separate negotiations. But so to summarize it, what we are doing for them now is more market opening in Western Europe, more financial assistance, more technical assistance, political dialogue, all meant to make them members of the family as much as possible in the present circumstances, and a perspective on full membership of the community.
Mr. Isaac.
Thank you. Your Excellency, in your opinion, when do you think the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, will regain their lost independence, and then as countries of a long-standing Western culture eventually have the opportunity to join the European community?
Yeah, they have. I cannot but seemingly dodge your question a bit. There will be a perspective for them to become members of the European community in the event of their really becoming independent sovereign states recognized as such by the world community. Yeah? So we, as the situation is now, these countries striving at gaining independence, but still finding themselves within the Soviet Union, now there is no possibility for them to become full members of the European community. But as in case they would emancipate themselves from the Soviet Union, and they would show up after some time as sovereign states, full members of the world community, and by the world community recognized as such, then their perspectives on European community membership would be certainly not worse than those of Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, or whomsoever.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ambassador, as I understand from your remarks, at the present time or the foreseeable future, the authority of the community, including the Parliament, over the member countries is rather limited. You recommend legislation, for example, which they have to adopt in order to enforce these. Looking down the road a ways, is it contemplated that the time will come where you will have a Parliament which will be able to legislate so as to binding legislation on the member countries? And looking a little further down the road, is it possible that this may evolve into more of a united organization taking on authority in the field, for example, of foreign affairs?
The question is, would you comment upon the possibilities of the European Parliament becoming truly sovereign? And would you comment further upon that sovereignty in the area of foreign affairs?
Yeah. There is consensus now among the 12 governments that the European Parliament's position should be considerably strengthened. The Parliament has some important powers now, but by far not enough. The most important being on the budget. Of course, through that power, they can manage quite a few things, but it's by far not enough. The Parliament itself wants co-decision in all matters having to do with the creation of community legislation. And that wish may be fulfilled, not immediately, not tomorrow morning, but over time. And I'm sure that the results of that Intergovernmental Conference on Political Union will produce quite a few additional legislative powers for the European Parliament. It is a process. It grows and grows on. Now, foreign policy. I don't easily foresee a situation in which a European foreign policy would be created and practiced under direct control of the European Parliament. Parts of it, yes. When the Europeans do conclude treaties with foreign powers, for example, that will be something that needs the approval of the European Parliament. But I don't think we are already so far developed as to be ready to give the Parliament power to control day-to-day decisions on foreign policy. That is a matter of the longer run.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ambassador, in your remarks this evening, you've spoken about EFTA and the European countries and how they will ultimately interact with the community, but you neglected to mention the role of Turkey in all of this. Given its strategic situation in the area, can you elaborate on how you think Turkey can play an important role in the EC?
Yeah. You thought I neglected it? I left it unmentioned. let me tell you what the problems are. Turkey is the country that has applied for European community membership prior to anyone else. So the membership application by Turkey is on the table for quite a number of years already, and Turkey is still in the waiting room. How are the prospects? I don't think there is a prospect for membership by Turkey in the very short run. And why not? I'll try and explain. Not everyone in Europe is fully convinced. I'm not giving my personal opinion, of course, now in this delicate matter. I relate the fact that not everyone in Europe is fully convinced that Turkey, in its present state, does meet all the requirements as regards democracy, observance of human rights, and the rule of law. That's one. Secondly, there is considerable doubt whether the economic development of Turkey would allow the country to become member within a very short period of time. It's the same problem that Spain and Portugal had to face, and Greece, when it tried to enter in the 70s or in the beginning of the 80s. That is two. A third problem relates to the fact, and you are an intelligent audience, so I can just give you a hint, that new membership requires unanimity. Ever heard of Cyprus? Yeah? That's the third problem, unanimity. I think that in the minds of some, and again, I just relate the fact that in the minds of some also another fact may play a certain role, and that is that Turkey, as a fully Islamic country, would be a very new element in a grouping of nations that is almost fully based on Christian culture. Now, I don't say that people who are opposed to the idea of Turkey becoming a member are right or wrong. I just relate the facts. To give you a full picture of the variety of objections you can come across when talking in Europe about full membership for Turkey.
We certainly appreciate very much your sharing your time with us. We're grateful for the information which you shared with us, and we are also grateful for your taking so much time from your busy schedule. Thank you.